Hello and welcome to the FSF podcast. This is the show that is made by nerds for nerds. And we are so glad to have you people here in our blurred out nerdery today because we are under construction. So just ignore the blur. Anyway, our guest today has been involved in the Hollywood scene for quite some time. He's been a marketing consultant, a writer, a producer, and tied to some of the biggest IPs in Hollywood history. Some of those include Star Wars, Beast Wars for Transformers. There's G.I. Joe, Muppets Take Manhattan. Yes, sir. The Last Starfighter, and there are literally so many others that this man has been involved with. I am so pleased to welcome Craig Miller to the FSF podcast. Welcome to the show, Craig.
Thank you, Tim. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. I'm thrilled to have you. It's always because I am also one of these. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. You can't really tell it by what behind me, but in my previous office before we started doing reconstruction, it was all Star Wars behind me. That's just kind of who and where I am. So I saw that, who you were and that you were involved with Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. And I was like, I want to talk to him. So that's why I reached out and I thank you for accepting our invite. But one of the things I always like to do, Craig, when we start our interviews is I always like to know why people got involved in what they're doing and why they do what they do. I love to find out what makes people tick. And, I think it's probably why I liked sociology in school, but I like to know why people do what they do and why they're interested in what they're interested in. So in the story of Craig Miller, in the origin story of Craig Miller, what got you interested in working with movies and being a marketing consultant and all the other things that you've been involved in?
It really was an accident. All my life, I was a comics fan, a science fiction fan, movies, I loved all that stuff growing up. I got involved with fandom when I was like 13 years old and had been involved ever since, going to conventions, working on conventions. I started a comic book club when I was 12. I was a member of the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society in LA, which is a big, still ongoing science fiction club that started in the mid-30s. And I was in college. My degrees are all in psychology. And I met Charlie Lippincott, who was running marketing and licensing for Lucasfilm. Although we were called Star Wars Corporation back then. Lucasfilm was just the part actually shooting the movie. And I ended up consulting with Charlie on fandom and conventions for the marketing of Star Wars. This was back in 1976, before the movie came out, the first movie. Okay. And I ended up working at Lucasfilm full time, and spent 3.5 years at Lucasfilm, then became an independent publicity consultant for 10 years. And for the last almost 40 years, I've been writing and producing television. So, it just sort of happened by accident. If Charlie hadn't come up with the idea of marketing Star Wars directly to fans and hired me, I don't know what I'd be doing, but it wouldn't be the movie business, because I had, I just had no idea I could even be. I lived in LA, but my family wasn't in the industry, and
okay,
it wasn't like I want to be an actor or something. I just sort of stumbled into it and stayed, and it's worked out pretty good.
Okay. So I always, when you mentioned that you started some comic book clubs, so obviously there had to be a couple of comic books that really drew your attention, and this obviously was before the age of Star Wars. So what was your go-to comic? Who was your go-to hero?
Oh boy, that's a good question. And can I remember that far back?
I understand. I don't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, so it's fine.
Yeah. I read pretty much everything. Certainly everything in the way of superheroes. I started reading comics in the early mid '60s. So Superman and Batman and from the beginning, Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and eventually X-Men and all of that. But I was reading,
Sure.
you know, war comics like Sergeant Rock and going back into the 50s with the EC horror and science fiction comics. Um, I still have the bound volumes of the EC horror and science fiction comics on my
Oh, neat.
bookshelf. So I was pretty much reading everything in the way of comics, and was big into that. I was reading science fiction. I found fandom, um, organized fandom because I met Ray Bradbury, and he told me
Okay.
about the Los Angeles Science Fantasy Society, which is a club he no longer attended, but he had been attending and been a member of since he first moved out to Los Angeles in, I don't know, the 40s, I guess.
All right. Well, that's pretty cool. That's a nice pedigree there. I think anytime you can name drop anything attached to Lucasfilm and Ray Bradbury in your backstory, I think
Yeah.
that's pretty impressive. Okay, so I looked over your career and a lot of the things that you've done, Craig, and I'm always impressed with anybody that does Star Wars and has had anything to do with it. But I think there's a lot of things that you mentioned, some of the things that you were doing behind the scenes for Star Wars that people weren't familiar with or wouldn't know that you were attached to because you weren't out in the forefront. What
Yeah.
are some of those aspects of your work with the Star Wars universe that still bring you pride and joy today?
Well, there are a bunch of things. One of the things I was first hired to do was, um, with two parts. It was to deal with all the fan mail that was coming in and to create and run the official Star Wars fan club. So those are things I did. I wrote all the issues for the first few years of Bantha Tracks, the fan club newsletter.
Right,
I
yeah.
I designed the poster that Ralph McQuarrie painted that we gave to people when they joined. Um, did that, and my duties. We were a tiny company back then. Today, at Lucasfilm, I'm sure, and at every studio, they're big companies,
Sure.
and your job goes from here to here, and you only do these little things, or they may be big things, but whatever it is you do, they're very narrowly prescribed by that, and there's someone else doing the stuff to the left and the stuff to the right. Back then there were so few of us, we all kind of did everything. So I wrote some of the press releases, and I dealt with magazines and interviewers, and we had a department that did the licensing, but I would get involved because I knew more of the backstory of the movies, so I would help with some of the approvals. And I ended up doing things like, I came up with this idea. Sesame Street was having guest stars,
Okay.
um, usually actors, famous actors or singers. And I contacted, they were then called Children's Television Workshop, and said, "Hey, would you like to have R2D2 and C3PO as guest stars on Sesame Street?" And they said yes, and I ended up producer for Lucasfilm on it. Put together our team. We brought Tony Daniels in to play C3PO. I was one of the operators for R2D2. Back then, it took two people to operate R2. Today, only takes one, but that's
Sure.
technology. And I did Sesame Street wrote all of their scripts, but I did the approval of whether or not we would be in the some of the stuff they wrote. I actually
Oh,
had
sure.
to
Yeah.
turn down one segment, which ended up getting rewritten. Um, it's not a. It was all in this kind of stuff. It's not a matter of, oh, they wanted us to say dirty words or something that we couldn't say, but you always need the characters to stay in character, whether it's R2 and 3PO, or if you're having Luke Skywalker
Mm-hmm.
do something, it has to stay within character. And, so it was stuff like that. So I was producer for Lucasfilm on Sesame Street and also on some award shows and commercials and stuff. And just my duties kind of went a wide range of different areas, that and of course, we weren't, as a publicist, I wasn't publicizing me. I wasn't, while I did do appearances at like science fiction and comic book conventions, it wasn't really promoting me. It was promoting Star Wars or Empire or whatever.
Sure.
So my name's not attached to most things that I was involved with.
That's fair. That makes sense. Okay, so you were at Lucasfilm in the right time period. So I'm curious what your level of involvement was with the holiday special.
Everybody asks me that.
Well, it's the time period, Craig. You were in
No,
there at the right
I
time,
understand.
and especially there for marketing, it would make sense to me that some way, somehow, you may possibly be attached.
Well, unlike, say, Sesame Street, where I was producer for Lucasfilm, the holiday special was not one of the projects I was directly involved with. I was receiving copies of each draft of the script as they were being written. It originally started out as a 1-hour special.
Mm-hmm.
And then as Star Wars became bigger and bigger, the network got more and more excited and said, can they do a 90-minute special? And then they wanted to do a 2-hour special. And so additional scripts, they weren't significantly different. One was an hour script, and then there was a 90-minute script, and then there was a 2-hour script. And I was getting copies of that, and I was hearing about what was going on, but it wasn't a project I had direct involvement with. That was someone else's project.
Okay. Yeah, I'm always curious. Like I said, I'm always curious, and there's been a lot of, especially lately, resurgence of interest in the holiday special.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's actually a great documentary film out, just called "The Disturbance in the Force," which they interviewed me for, and I'm in a surprising amount of it. At least, surprising to me. I expected to be in it for like 1 10-second clip, but they dropped me in a lot of different places in it.
We've actually interviewed Kyle Newman, who was one of the producers of A Disturbance in the Force, and we talked a great deal about A Disturbance in the Force.
Mm-hmm.
That is a really good documentary, by the way.
It is.
And I did, it's the funny part about that. Looking back on it, I remember there being a Craig Miller, but I didn't realize that was you.
Yep.
Until just now. So, whereas you're saying that, I was in a surprising amount of that documentary. I'm like, wait a second. Oh yeah, because I did watch the film, and so
yeah. I looked a little different because I had been in the hospital just before that.
Oh, okay.
And to me, I look kind of sickly. And while normally my head is shaved, in the hospital you don't do that. So I had more hair than I do most of the time.
Well, you can't do anything about that, but
yeah.
All right. Well, excellent. But yeah, so guys, by the way, if you haven't watched A Disturbance in the Force, go check that out. It's a great documentary. Whether you like the Star Wars holiday special or you think, like George Lucas, that it should be deep sixed into the ever abyss of Star Wars, it's still really good. There's a lot of really neat cameos and interviews in there. People who really enjoyed it. So that's a well done documentary.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really well done documentary. They come at it from a very respectful, I guess, point of view. They're not coming in saying, "Oh, this is terrible." They're coming in saying, "What did you try to do? How did it go from what you tried to do to where it ended up?" And it's it is what it is.
I love some of the descriptions by some of the folks that were involved, who were immensely proud of their work, and they should be. But then also some of the folks are like, yeah, this just got away from us.
Well, I don't know how much you want to go into the holiday special, but the bottom line, there are two things to keep in mind. Unfortunately, science fiction was not popular in the 70s.
True.
None of the writers for the holiday special were science fiction fans or Star Wars fans. They were people who wrote variety material.
Correct.
Specials and, network programming. There are a lot of variety shows on the air back then.
The Donnie and Marie style stuff.
Yeah. And they were just writing that kind of material and kind of giving it a Star Wars overlay.
Right.
And the other thing is, if you were, old like me or older, you would be familiar with the variety specials of that period. And there were a lot of them. And most of them were like that. The Star Wars Holiday Special is bad as Star Wars, but as a variety special, it's about average. It's none of it's great, none of it's wonderful, but that's the kind of material they were doing on those specials in that period. And A Disturbance in the Force talks about that and talks about some of the ones that were much worse.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, but the Star Wars Holiday Special is mostly disappointing as Star Wars.
Yeah,
not
I think
as
that's
material.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest crux of it right there, is that people went into it expecting Star Wars, not Star Wars-ish, and so I think that's the biggest part of the letdown.
Kind of the bottom line on it.
Yeah, agreed. But it has been cool to see, like, even in the recent Star Wars show on Disney Plus, Skeleton Crew, using things that were from the holiday special to kind of bring those back into canon and make those,
slowly bits and pieces of the holiday special have crept into canon.
And I think that's great, personally.
Yeah. I think it's fun. Life Day has become a big thing. Yep. Even Disneyland is starting to recognize Life Day. So I think that's all cool.
Yeah, we joke around that the next thing to come in needs to be the B. Arthur dance number, and then we call it, then it's a lock. So,
yeah, I don't know if we're gonna go that far.
Probably not, no, but it's it's worth a hope. All right, Craig, we've talked about all the things that you've done in the film industry as both marketing consultant, but we also want to talk about some of the things that you've done as a writer as well, and a producer. How do you, in my mind, marketing is over here and writing's way over here. So how do we make the transition from being a marketing consultant to being a writer? And, I guess most importantly, what was the first thing that you wrote where you said, yeah, I think I can do this?
Well, I'd been a marketing consultant for about 10 years. Warner Brothers, Disney, Universal, Jim Henson. Mm-hmm. I'd done a lot of stuff, and mostly genre films, which I love. But I was getting tired of what I was doing. And I was finding that I was dealing less and less with filmmakers and more with lawyers and MBAs who didn't understand marketing and the importance of it to the success of a film. And I just wanted to get into something more directly creative. And I had never really written a script for anything other than, I did like the 800 messages we did to market Empire Strikes Back, little scripts for, special things, but no, here's a episode of a TV show or a movie kind of thing. I just said, well, writing seems interesting. And one of the people at the company I was working with who had become a good friend was a writer. And we said, well, why don't we try writing something together? And not really understanding how the world worked, I didn't start out by writing spec scripts, which is really how you do it and how you really need to do it. But, a friend of back in the mid 80s, which is when I started writing, television animation used to have syndication where you would have shows appearing on local stations all over the country. And for those, rather than ordering like 13 or 22 episodes like they do today for a network thing, they would order 65 episodes for a syndicated show, which means you need a lot of scripts and typically a lot of writers. So they had a long schedule and a great need, which meant they could take chances on new writers.
Excellent.
And a friend of mine had just been hired, actually, not even a friend, really an acquaintance of mine, had been hired to be the story editor on a syndicated version or an animated version of the movie The Ghostbusters, called The Real Ghostbusters. And I asked him if he'd take a chance and let me try writing an episode. And that was J. Michael Straczynski, Joe Straczynski, who later did Babylon 5 and lots of other stuff. But he was working in animation back then. He'd been hired to do Real Ghostbusters. And he was willing to take a chance. And so we pitched some ideas. He liked one, gave us a go-ahead to write the outline for it, like that, wrote the script. We end up writing 3 episodes for the first season of The Real Ghostbusters. And my career started from there, and I've been writing ever since.
All right. Excellent. Okay. So, yeah, that's always that's kind of an interesting transition to me because, and it's not that somebody has to wear one hat, right? I mean, we all do multiple things inside of our lives, we all don't wear just one hat, but I always think it's interesting when, like I said, I like to know what makes people tick. So when I see somebody that's done marketing over here and then writing over here, and I go, well, how do we get, it's just, for me in my own brain, it's kind of neat to hear how those two worlds, started to collide.
Yeah. What was I smart to do it? Well, it worked out. Was it likely to work? Maybe not. It worked out. And so now I've written and produced hundreds of episodes of television. So,
well, I'd say it worked out.
Yeah.
So, absolutely worked out. Yeah, you've got some really cool titles to your credit, both as a writer and producer, and obviously in the age of your marketing career, definitely on the marketing side as well.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question, Craig, and this is an opinion question, and I'm kind of curious about this just because of the number of things that you've worked on. We're kind of in Hollywood right now. It kind of seems like we're in the age of the reboot, where things from the 70s and 80s, they're trying to freshen them up and bring them up to modern technology standards and things like that. And so some of the titles that I know that you have worked on have been discussed as being brought up for reboot, like Last Starfighter. I keep seeing that name being brought up, and as something that should get a fresh look at. So what are your thoughts on this topic as far as the age of the reboot?
Well, you know, I think the bottom line is whatever you do, do well. So people do
Right.
remakes and sequels well, and they do them badly. But they do new things well, and they do them badly.
Also true.
You know, so I think it's a matter of do it well. And of course, everyone thinks they're doing it well when they're doing it. Some people are just wrong.
Right.
But it's always been the case in movies that they do revivals and remakes. Lots of the early classic Hollywood movies that we think of as great films were remakes of silent movies.
True.
You know, staying with classics for a moment, the Maltese Falcon, considered one of the best movies of all time. The version we all think of with Humphrey Bogart was the third version of that story made. And that was in a 10-year period. You know, between the first one and the third one was only 10 years. They made it 3 times. You know, so I mean, Hollywood's been doing that forever. So, you know, remakes, reboots, we seem to do an awful lot of it these days, but still, it's not anything new. But if you look at Broadway, how many revivals of this classic play have there been?
Yeah.
You know, now, unlike Hollywood, you can't go back and look at that production of, you know, whatever play. You can only see it by having it remounted. But they do that constantly. Every year, Broadway has some, and sometimes many, restagings or revivals of different things.
Yeah, very true.
And while novelists don't, here's a rewrite of my this classic novel, you do see how many sequels, how many continuations. Here's the 12th, Sherlock Holmes. How many Sherlock Holmes stories? Well, those are really just sequels, right? You know, here's those characters having a different adventure. It happens more with mysteries and I guess romances and a lot of genre or category fiction. But they're doing sequel over and over again. So, you know, it isn't unique to Hollywood. And the reason people do it in Hollywood and out is it works. People go, hey, I want to see this next chapter of Fast and the Furious. For reasons I don't understand personally.
I'm lost on that one. They lost me at about 7 movies ago. So,
but people go see them. If people didn't go see the sequels and reboots, if they didn't go to Broadway revivals, if they didn't buy the 25th book in this mystery series, they wouldn't be publishing them. They wouldn't be producing them. So people do it all, and no one argues about that in any of the other areas, just in Hollywood. And again, it comes back to do it well, and we'll be happy to see it. Do it badly, and it's just one more reason to kick people about it.
Okay, I'll agree with all of that. Yeah, I think that's good insight, because I think many times we overlook the fact that there are so many remakes and reboots. And while you were talking about that, I was thinking just with Alfred Hitchcock alone, how many movies of his own that he remade. You know, there's a couple different versions of, I think there's 2 or 3 versions of the 39 Steps. There's
The Man Who Knew Too Much, he did
The
twice.
Man Who Knew, The Man Who Knew Too Much. So yeah, there's even, even the same filmmakers are remaking their own things. So so yeah. Okay. No, I like the insight. Very good. All right, Craig, we have entered the time when I need to ask you a silly question. And it's not all that silly, but my co-host who couldn't be here tonight, Kathleen, she was out and about with her daughter, and somebody asked her daughter, who's 5 years old, this question, but didn't ask Kathleen. And we both thought, there shouldn't really be a time in your life ever when somebody stops asking you this. So, with all that being said, Craig Miller, what's your favorite dinosaur?
The weird thing is, I knew that was going to be that question. Well, for a couple of different reasons, I like what, when I was a kid, we called the Brontosaurus.
Sure.
I know he's got a new name and and not since I was a kid, but before that, he had a whole different head. But that's one of the reasons I like him, is that originally they thought he had one head, and all because there was one paleontologist who was a big deal who insisted that this was his head, and everyone knew he was wrong, but they couldn't change it until after he died. And now that he has a new name, but I just like the Brontosaurus. I think I think they're good and they're fun, and they weren't likely to eat me. Step on me maybe, but unlikely to eat me.
But they move slow enough, you could probably get out of the way. So,
No, you haven't seen me walk.
Well, this is also true, Craig. All right.
Hey, I grew up in Los Angeles. We don't walk fast.
Fair enough. Well, Craig, thank you so much for being on the FSF podcast today. Where can our listeners and our viewers go to find out more about you, your work, and any appearances you'll be making?
Well, two things I want to mention is I have 2 books out. One is Star Wars Memories. I just happen to have copies here, which is all about my years at Lucasfilm. And that just came out, More Movie Memories. Move it towards the camera. Which is about actually everything, more Star Wars stories, marketing genre movies in the 80s, and writing animation. So that's about all those things. And that's available at Amazon.
Okay.
Both books, and barnesandnoble.com. And I'm told even walmart.com you can get them.
Well, there you go.
But, and I make appearances mostly at Southern California conventions. If any convention wants me to come and tell Star Wars stories or stories about anything else, I'm always happy to come out. But mostly I'll be at WonderCon. I'll be at San Diego Comic Con. I expect I'll have tables at both of those where I sell copies of the book. I'm going to be at Gallifrey, the Doctor Who convention, in a couple of weeks. And that's all I think I'm scheduled for at the moment, but it always changes. And people can find me. The easiest place to find me is on Facebook. There are a lot of Craig Millers, but I'm the one with the banner photo of me in front of the Millennium Falcon. And I'm also on Blue Sky and X. And you can reach me at either of those.
All right. Excellent. Well, we will make sure to put links, not only for your books, but your social media sites as well, for people to be able to find out more about you, and go check out his books, guys. And as a reminder, if you haven't already, subscribing is the most important thing you can do to help our show continue to grow. Get great guests like Craig to come on and share these stories and have these conversations with us and give you some funny moments to listen to. So please subscribe here on YouTube. And if you want to check us out on socials, you can check us out at FSF Podcast on Blue Sky. You can find us there. That's the social site that I think will be playing in the most these days. But hey, go check out Craig's work. Subscribe. Let's all have some fun together. And again, Craig, thank you for being on the show. Very much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And all right, gang, that's going to conclude us for the FSF podcast today. May the Force continue to be with you as you live long and prosper. Goodbye.
Copyright 2025 FSF Podcast. Reference any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF Podcast. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpodcast.com.